As the submarine lurked in the water, her gun aimed at the nearby fort, a nearby barque sat as a quiet witness to the chaos that would unfold. The men in the fort were blissfully unaware that evening, going about their business as usual. Without warning, the first shell was fired. As shot after shot rang out from the submarine, the Peter Iredale would sit silently, witnessing the first attack on contiguous United States soil in World War II. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. First of all, happy birthday to my Aunt Jelly, our wonderful dive expert who helped me with the Hilma Hooker episode we made last year. She requested the Peter Iredale for her birthday this year, and we're here to make an interesting episode happen. Now let's get into this fascinating wreck. Unfortunately, we know little of her building and specs, which makes ship fanatics like us all sad and disappointed. However, there's some interesting tidbits I did uncover involving World War II that we'll get to later. For now, we do know that the ship was named after her owner, Peter Iredale, and he owned her as part of his fleet and was a well-known businessman and mariner at the time in Liverpool, England. The ship was built in Maryport, a town and civil parish in Cumbria, England, being built in June of 1890 by R. Ritson & Co. Limited for P. Iredale and Porter. We don't know when exactly she was ordered, laid down, or completed, but we do know she was a four-masted steel barque. She had steel plates riveted into an iron frame, complete with royal sails above double top and top gallant sails, and she was the largest ship completed by Ritson. She was 285 feet long and measured 2,075 net register tons. For our younger audience members and those unaware, net register tonnage is a ship's cargo volume capacity expressed in register tons, one of which equals to a volume of 100 cubic feet. Originally, she was captained by G.A. Brown, the helm then later being passed on to Captain H. Lawrence. We don't know much about her career before the sinking other than she was a cargo barque that regularly made trips to the Oregon coast and back to the UK, with some stops in Central and South America. Before we get into her final voyage, let's get you acclimated with the Oregon coast and the complicated shipping routes in this area. Though Salem is the capital of the state of Oregon, Portland is by far its most populated city, situated on top of and around the Columbia River and near the border with the state of Washington. Portland is beautiful and very centrally located with many resources, so it only makes sense that even in Peter Iredale's time, shipping resources were in and around the Portland area. To get there, you enter the Columbia River from the Pacific Ocean and make your way up to Portland. This is all and well, except for the fact that the sandbar at the mouth of the river, the Columbia Bar, is quite literally a death sentence in of itself. In this area, there are around 2,000 shipwrecks and 700 lives were lost, just at the mouth of the Columbia River alone. Peter Iredale needed to get to Portland, and to get there, she'd have to make it over the Columbia Bar. The Columbia Bar proves tricky for many ships, but there's nothing tricky about finding our episodes. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know down in the comments section below. Alright, time to get more into the final voyage and grounding of Peter Iredale. On or about September 6, 1906, the Peter Iredale left Salina Cruz, Mexico, heading for Portland, Oregon with 1,000 tons of ballast and a crew of 27, including 2 stowaways. A stowaway, also called a clandestine traveler in some parts of the world, is a person who secretly boards a vehicle, like a ship, airplane, train, cargo truck, or bus, usually without paying fares as well. Ballast, for anyone unaware, as I was not when I first started researching ships, is a heavy material such as gravel, sand, iron, or lead that is placed deep within a ship's belly to improve stability. You can also use seawater in ballast tanks to improve ballast, and this is the cheapest and most available resource. Peter Iredale's final voyage up the coast toward Oregon was entirely routine up until the night of October 25, 1906. That night, Captain H. Lawrence spotted the Tillamook Rock Lighthouse around 3:20 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and the crew then altered the course first east-northeast, then shifting to northeast to enter the mouth of the Columbia River and brave the Columbia Bar. The tide was rising at this time, and a thick, dense mist blanketed the Pacific Ocean. Humidity is higher in the Pacific Northwest, and it rains frequently in this area, so fog and mist are normal occurrences at sea in this area. Not only was there mist, but the winds were picking up from the west, and the seas were getting heavier. Peter Iredale was struggling in the wind and waves when the crew attempted to wear or jibe the ship away from shore. A wear or jibe is a sailing maneuver whereby a sailing vessel reaching downwind turns its stern through the wind, then exerting its force from the opposite side of the ship. While attempting to wear the ship from danger, a heavy northwest squall grounded Peter Iredale on Clatsop Sands, now called Clatsop Spit, just outside of Fort Stevens. High seas and heavy winds are the culprits of this grounding, and the ship dug deep into the sand. A lifeboat was dispatched from nearby Hammond, Oregon, a small town in Clatsop County that is about 2.5 miles from where Peter Iredale wrecked. Fort Stevens is just 1.3 miles from where Peter Iredale wrecked, and the lifeboat from Hammond brought the sailors to Fort Stevens where they were tended to. There were no life-altering injuries or deaths in the accident. Of course, with all shipping accidents, a court of inquiry was called. This time it was a naval court inquiry since it was on Fort Stevens' doorstep. This was held in the nearby city of Astoria on November 12th and 13th in 1906. On November 13th, 1906, Portland photographer Leo Simon photographed the Peter Iredale, just 19 days after the accident. The British Vice Consulate reviewed these photos and conducted the inquiry to determine the exact cause of the wreck. After the investigation was completed, there was no blame placed on Lawrence nor the crew for the loss of the Peter Iredale. In fact, they were commended for their tremendous efforts to try and fight for the Peter Iredale, and unfortunately, the Oregon coast was the winner of that fight. There was little damage to the hull of Peter Iredale, and there were originally plans to tow her back to England. However, several weeks went by waiting for favorable weather and sea conditions, and in this time, she listed to port and sank even deeper into the sands, rendering it nearly impossible to dig her back out. Her salvage rights were then sold in 1917, however, she was oddly never broken up, and was left on the beach the way she was. All that remains now is the bow, a few iron ribs, and a couple masts. According to my Aunt Shelley, it's best to visit her in low tides, and she's still a very cool sight to see. Captain Lawrence would give one final toast to the Peter Iredale, stating, quote, "May God bless you, and may your bones bleach in the sands." I love that he did that for her. She was a beautiful vessel, and he obviously was a good captain and had great respect for her. His toast to the ship was touching and heartwarming, much like the love from our YouTube members and patrons. This episode couldn't be possible without our amazing YouTube members and patrons. Thank you all so much. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Okay, let's get into that interesting tidbit with World War II and the Peter Iredale. You might be asking me, Eleanor, the Peter Iredale sank in 1906, what does that have to do with World War II? And to that I say, be patient, my friend, we are getting to the good part. If you didn't know, and I sure didn't, the Oregon coast actually saw action in World War II. This, my dear friends, was the bombardment of Fort Stevens. Fort Stevens was a military installation that guarded the mouth of the Columbia River in Oregon, and it dated back to the American Civil War, being an active military reservation from 1863 until 1947. This stronghold was the target assigned to the Imperial Japanese Navy submarine I-25, being ordered to attack enemy shipping in the area and the fort with their 14-centimeter deck gun. The submarine was also transporting a Yokosuka E-14Y seaplane and was manned by 97 men, including Commander Akiji Tagami. On June 21, 1942, I-25 had entered U.S. coastal waters, lurking below fishing boats to avoid minefields in the area. Late that night, Commander Tagami ordered his crew to surface the submarine at the mouth of the Columbia River, aiming at Fort Stevens. Fort Stevens was armed with more or less obsolete Endicott-era artillery, including 12-inch mortars and several 10-inch and 6-inch disappearing guns, which looked a lot like big cannons. Tagami ordered the deck gun to open fire on Fort Stevens Battery Russell, and to his surprise, his shots were harmless, in part because the fort's commander ordered an immediate blackout, making it more difficult to hit their targets. The fort commander also did not permit returning fire, since the flash from the gun muzzles would reveal their position. It's a good thing they didn't try, because when they used a depression position finder, they realized the submarine was out of range anyway. I-25 and her crew tried their hardest, and thankfully most of their rounds landed in a nearby baseball field or a swamp, though one landed pretty close to a battery rustle and another next to a concrete pillbox, which is a nickname for an older-looking bunker. One round damaged several large telephone cables, which was the only harm Tagami and I-25 really did, with 17 shells fired at Fort Stevens. United States Army Air Force's planes were out on a training mission at the time and spotted I-25, calling in her location for an A-29 Hudson bomber to engage her. The bomber did locate I-25, however the submarine was successful in dodging the bombs and submerging, escaping with her tail between her legs. Thankfully, there was very little damage and no injuries or deaths at Fort Stevens that night. However, with the Japanese attack here and the Aleutian Islands falling under Japanese control just 2 weeks earlier, there was now a full-bore West Coast invasion scare. Therefore, to dissuade invasion and comfort the people living in the area, rolls upon rolls of barbed wire would be strung from Point Adams near the mouth of the Columbia River all the way down to the beached wreckage of Peter Iredale. Peter Iredale was not damaged in the bombardment of Fort Stevens, and she would remain wrapped in barbed wire until the end of World War II. The bombardment of Fort Stevens marked the only time that a military base in the contiguous United States was ever attacked by Axis powers during World War II, and was only the second time a continental U.S. military base was attacked by an enemy since the bombing of Dutch Harbor in the Aleutian Islands just 2 weeks prior. This is not to discredit Pearl Harbor. Hawaii is just not part of the continental United States or the contiguous United States. Pearl Harbor was the first time the Axis powers ever attacked the United States directly in World War II. So, even though she wasn't directly involved in it, Peter Iredale did bear witness to wartime violence during the Second World War. Today, it's been well over a century since she was grounded, and despite this, there's still a surprising amount of wreckage left, including her rusted bow and masts that are still visible jutting out of the sand. She's a popular tourist attraction since she is one of the most visible and easily accessible shipwrecks on the Oregon coast, being contained within Fort Stevens State Park, which is a part of Lewis and Clark National Historical Park. For those of us who love the Oregon coast and ships, the Peter Iredale is a truly fascinating story and a great wreck to visit, especially since no lives were lost and that can be celebrated. Her small role in the bombardment of Fort Stevens only adds to the intrigue with her tale, and adds to the attraction to her as a tourist location. If you would like to visit Fort Stevens or the Peter Iredale, they are located in Hammond, Oregon. There is a campground within this 3,763-acre park, and lots to see within the fortress and the wreck of the Peter Iredale. For more information, you can call Fort Stevens State Park Associates at 1-503-861-3170 or their information line, which is 1-800-551-6949. This is not sponsored by them, but I would love to avail you guys of the opportunity to visit the site if you are interested. Nearby in Astoria, Oregon, is a little-known gem called the Columbia River Maritime Museum, and here you will find information about ships wrecked on the Oregon and Washington coasts as well as within the Columbia River, and with admission you can also tour the lightship Columbia. I highly recommend you make a stop here as well, as I've never had a bad experience at a museum in the Pacific Northwest. You can call them at 1-503-325-2323 for more information. Again, not sponsored by them, but it's a great museum to visit and get your ship fix. The wreck of the Peter Iredale is just one of many that dot the Oregon coast, and the fact her wreck is still so visible has added to her fame. I commend the captain and crew for their bravery and skill in trying to save the Peter Iredale, and I hope we can continue to tell her story and share it with generations to come. And last but not least, happy birthday, Aunt Shelley! If you liked that story and wanted to hear something similar, check out our Oregon Coast Shipwrecks playlist in the cards. Next week, we get into the story of the steamboat Monmouth, a horrific sinking that killed over 300 Muskogee people that were forcibly removed from their homes. And it's an episode selected by our members. Thank you for tuning into Shipwreck Sunday, have a great week, and we'll see you next time.